It is the dramatic start to the first cast trip of the season with one no-show and another last-minute guest on the trip in this seventh episode of season 16 of Real Housewives of Orange County, titled Wild Cards, which we will find out very quickly what that is even referring to. But first, I am Nick Zangl. Thank you so much for being here, and let's jump right into the recap and our reactions. Which, if you're in the live chat anywhere, make sure to tell me you're here, say hi, and leave any of your thoughts, which I will read on screen as we go. All right, we start this episode with Emily, Jen, and Nicole going bikini shopping before the Cabo San Lucas girls trip, where Emily is carrying around a 2-liter bottle of ginger ale because she is still feeling bad after the heavy drinking the night before at Max's book launch party, which we saw last week, which I thought was a little over dramatic of her, but some have argued that Emily is a little thirsty and a little bit of a tryhard, so this does not surprise me that she's doing this. But then they are all complimenting each other as they're trying on the bikinis, and Emily makes a joke about Jen standing here next to her looking like her daughter because Emily is very tall compared to Jen and Nicole. But then the conversation quickly turns to Nicole and Noella's relationship, where Noella has said Nicole isn't a good friend, and Nicole says Noella started talking bad about Heather and goes further saying Noella has even talked about everybody in the group, where Emily says in her confessional she thinks Nicole is actually the one being shady and petty. Now, Nicole ends the scene by saying if Noella is going on this trip, then she will not be going on the trip. So that is my first stopping point to give my thoughts, which is my whole dilemma in this situation is from the start of the season, Nicole has seemed like a nice person who just kind of got caught up in all this drama and the whirlwind of the show and the friend dynamics, everyone trying to fight for camera time and turn on each other and form alliances and whatnot. But also it appears that Nicole's ultimatum over Noella going to Cabo is kind of the perfect squeeze out of Nicole from the show, which we will get a little more confirmation later on this. It'll come up again. But let's keep going to Shannon, who is now FaceTiming her boyfriend, John, as she is packing for Cabo San Lucas, saying in a reluctant way after he asked her, yeah, I'm excited, I guess. And Shannon says she hasn't seen everyone in the group in 2 weeks because she was in Nashville and then she skipped the party, Max's book launch party, because she wasn't feeling well. But she recalls the last time she saw everyone in the group at Shane's bar passing party. She said she felt like everyone was coming after her and is kind of nervous to be around everybody again. But she says at least her and Heather after that party are now in a more decent place. We will have to see if it stays that way, but we will have to keep watching to find out. But now we are to Heather and her being visited by Gina, who came over to chat before, as they're packing for the Cabo trip and right before they leave. And we learn that they are all flying private because of Heather, and Gina then goes in asking for a favor from Heather to invite Noella to the trip because Noella recently made comments to Gina about feeling lonely if everyone else is going to Cabo without her. Gina says she would rather have Noella go and be there with them and maybe risk some of the drama than the trade-off of her being by herself and them worried about her. But Heather then says that she did extend the invitation to Noella to Max's party because even though every time they get together something goes wrong, they end up working it out right away. But Heather says everything went well at the book launch party with Noella until they got home and Max was opening the presents from people who attended, and they got to Noella's present, which Heather described kind of lightly as questionable. And this is where Gina is already horrified before even hearing what this is all about. But we then get a montage of Heather reading some of the cards in the game that Noella got Max, which was kind of like a bisexual, fun, playful game, I guess. Or an LGBT, whatever, like card game. And Heather says it was thoughtful of Noella to give her a gift, but it was not appropriate for a 17-year-old. And Gina, as Heather's reading some of these situations on the card, is rightfully uncomfortable, as you see here, hearing Heather read these out loud. Luckily, we as viewers got spared hearing some of these situations read from Heather that are supposed to be meant for her daughter. And they're pretty explicit, so most of it was bleeped out. And Heather basically calls it pornography, which I'm sure is going to come up later based on the preview for the season. But because of all the bleeping out of the phrases, it's kind of funny because the only part that wasn't bleeped out was one of the cards that actually had Heather's name on it for some reason. I didn't know these type of games actually had names on them, but I guess it's just a scenario that's on there that they had to act out. I don't know, but it was very awkward to watch with Gina there as well. But then Heather says she doesn't want to leave anybody out, followed by a failed attempt by Gina to convince Heather to invite Noella. But Heather then gives in anyway and says, I will invite her, but it is on you, Gina, to handle her, is basically what she's saying. Of course, though, Heather knows the drama is good for the show if she invites Noella and knows how to play it up, and she knows the game. So she went with it. But let's react to this. So this game, I believe, is the piece of information referenced a couple weeks ago in Noella's Watch What Happens Live appearance, where Andy and her were kind of talking about something that's going to come up in a few weeks. I think this is it. And the reason why in real life now, after filming, Noella and Heather still aren't friends. I don't think that spoils the season because I want to know how much worse it gets and see what happens at the reunion, because if they're still not friends come reunion time, it's going to get pretty interesting at the reunion. Now, the card game will also apparently have more fallout in the next few weeks on the cast trip in particular. So we'll have to be watching to see what happens with that. But I also agree with Heather and Gina how this was not an appropriate gift for a teenager. I get that sex is a fun part of life, but unfortunately, especially for young people who are exploring, and her as a recently out bisexual young lady, but unfortunately, and she's almost 18, so the legal consent thing is there. But unfortunately, I think this gift by Noella fetishizes bisexuality. I don't know if that was her intent, but it's almost like the first thing she thought of when she heard that Max was bisexual was to introduce her to sex. Whereas I can see also how Heather, from a mother's perspective, knows obviously what comes with a relationship and all the assets besides the sexual part, and probably wants her daughter to be a well-rounded, healthy individual in a relationship, and not just one that places all the emphasis and puts sex on top of the list above everything else. So maybe Noella is just not very self-aware, as we will see this come up again later, but I thought it was just a very interesting thing, and that's the sexual part will come up later as well regarding it when they actually get on the trip. But let's keep going. So everyone is on their way to the airport and the private jet suite that they are waiting in before they board the plane, where Heather shares her family goes to Cabo 10 times a year. So that is why they're choosing that to have a second home or vacation home. Interesting that they're able to go 10 times a year, which is a lot. But we learn Noella is coming late, which is welcomed by Heather to limit their exposure to each other, because clearly Heather was reluctant to even invite her in the first place. And then we get a quick comment about how Nicole is not coming on the trip. Presumably, this is probably the last episode we will see her in. I'm guessing refusing to go on a girls' trip, coupled with what's going on with her and Heather, and they might want to protect the Dubrows. I'm guessing that was an easy way to get her out of the show and fire her, to kind of phase her out of the show. And they probably showed that scene first in this episode just to kind of wrap up Nicole, basically showing her and telling her, she's telling us, the viewers, that she's not on the show anymore. So, on the plane, Heather is explaining the plan for the trip, and Gina, in her confessional, is welcoming this initiative taken by Heather. And she says some other people, in contrast to what Gina said, would probably find Heather to be bossy. I think she's been called bossy pants or fancy pants or whatever. But on the ride from the airport to the house, Shannon is poking Fun Emily and keeps saying, "Fun Emily's out, Fun Emily's out," where Emily appears to be annoyed by that phrase continuing to come up, where Emily basically says, "If you say that one more time, I'm going to do something to you. So they arrive at the house, and Shannon needs to pull her pants up. Then she is speaking Spanish to their greeter. They all cheers with their margaritas that they get as they arrive, and they walk down to the pool where a mariachi band is playing in a near 100-degree weather climate, with Shannon here trying to dance like she's dancing to the mariachi. But this is followed by them picking their rooms, where we see Heather's armband mini purse. This was questionable. I don't think I've ever seen an armband mini purse like that. I've seen the little tiny purses on like a red carpet that some celebrities have been holding and wearing. I don't get it, to be honest, because it doesn't even hold your phone, which is probably the most essential thing you need, and a few credit cards or whatever. I don't get it. Is it a coin purse? Is it an AirPods holder? Is it earrings, jewelry, or is it just a show-off statement to kind of start a conversation? I don't know. Let me know what you thought of this if you noticed this. But let's keep going to, now that everyone has their room, they are all settling in, where Jen is now FaceTiming her husband, Ryan, who is sharing with Jen, much to her surprise, that they have a lemon tree and they grew a pineapple with the kids underneath the tree. And this prompts Jen to share how she is still struggling to find a balance between family, work, and friends. Now, I think this is a precursor to what we're finally going to see regarding Jen and her husband and their marriage, taking a turn from a more passive conversation, lighthearted about it, to a more serious, more aggressive, confrontational tone in the next few weeks. But we'll have to wait to see how that plays out. But now, to Heather and finishing a meeting with her architect for the home that they want to build in Cabo. And Emily and Gina then join her to sit down to look at the plans for the house. And Heather is getting emotional as she's explaining the reason for this home being her and Terry want to have a place for her kids to spend time together when Terry and Heather are no longer around, because Heather says she had kids later in life. And Heather in her confessional is sharing about a dream she had recently where she was seeing all of her kids kind of looking out and saying, "Oh, mom would have loved this," and she thinks that they were maybe looking at their future families all together and doing that without her or her husband Terry. But after planning the rest of the day, once they get over that conversation, Gina then recounts her shark attack from years past trips on the show, prompting her to want to ride horses on land instead of going in the water that day. But I wanted to say, I give Heather and Terry a lot of criticism. I have this past season quite a bit, but it is nice that they have a close family unit and they do show that. So I think that is a really good part of what they show. And I think it's nice also that they want to leave their kids a place where they can remain close to each other and have that legacy of keeping their family intact. But also, I thought it was weird that Heather described the angle of the design for the house as, for a family home that she wants to give to her kids and their future families, she described it as something she wanted to be sexy. Now, let me know what you think about that. Maybe she didn't mean it in a sexual way, meaning she meant it was kind of like sleek and cool. But then again, we are talking about Heather, who has a storyline about her daughter's sexuality this season, but also just did a scene about the sexual card game that she thought was inappropriate. So I'm a little confused still by Heather's angle here. Maybe she's just throwing as much as she can to stick at the wall and just trying to be entertaining. I don't know, but let me know if I'm thinking too hard about this. And then we will move on to now Noella is packing for her trip to Cabo. She says she realizes she was the last one invited to the trip, but she is not going to let Heather Dubrow's shade by inviting her last ruin her trip. Emily, Gina, and Shannon are now riding horses on the beach. Emily and Shannon share how they both have life experience growing up horseback riding, but Gina contrasts this as she does as kind of the fish out of water Gina by saying she does not have any experience, but still praises Emily's riding skills. And they follow this up by sitting under an umbrella on the beach on the sand after the horseback riding, where the heat from the area pops the bottle of champagne cork off the bottles for them, and it freaks them out, which I think is freaky because imagine a cork randomly popping off a bottle and pointing towards you. That would be scary. But they also talk about their concern for Noella and Heather interacting on this trip. Excuse me one second. Gina then thinks that them coming under the same roof would allow for bonding between them, but Shannon and Emily don't seem to think that will happen. And this is followed by Shannon saying she wants the three of them, the three Amigas, to act as peacemakers, and Gina hopes to take steps in the right direction at the very least, but we shall see if that actually happens. All right, now to Heather and Jen, who are catching up at the breakfast table. I guess it's morning, maybe afternoon, or maybe brunch time. Catching up, talking about their eating habits because they're eating food, where Jen is talking about her lifestyle in general, with her having a practice that she's had a lot, and it forces her to kind of get home very late. And this allows Heather to open up about her experience with Terry when he was at the height of his practice build, and how there is a point where you have to kind of force yourself to change your habits or things don't work out and your family starts falling apart. Jen then shares how she's had health issues over the years stemming from a bone tumor in her leg, and says she manages it through physical therapy and working out in ways that help kind of manage the pain. And when I heard her talk about this, it made me think maybe the ex-boyfriend lawsuit that we were made aware of last week and we talked more about on the Recap and React, maybe the cancer treatment mention from the ex-boyfriend in that lawsuit was maybe more related to her bone marrow or her bone tumor issue. I don't know. We'll see if anything comes out more about that. But the three Amigas are now arriving back at the house to get ready for dinner. And the front door has these cutouts that aren't windows. It's like wood cutouts around the door with no glass, and they're like poking their heads through it. And so I thought that was interesting, and I was curious to kind of understand the reason behind that type of door and those type of windows. I'm guessing it's more weatherproof in Mexico, where they have more tropical storms and more like high winds and more extreme weather. I don't know, but they then end up jumping in the pool with their clothes on because they're so hot, and Shannon almost jumps in with her phone. Heather then arrives to the pool asking how everything went, where Tequila, Emily, and Shannon are having fun on the hammock, where they end up falling off and being silly. One thing I wanted to say was, I can't imagine how warm the crew is with their cameras and their equipment and everything on, considering the cast is barely closed and they're freaking melting their brains off. So I just feel bad. Hopefully they all got a lot of breaks and a lot of water. They were able to kind of be safe. So anyways, we are now on our way to dinner, where Shannon says Noella is finally on her way after having a passport debacle at the airport, which is quickly followed by Noella arriving at the house right after they had all left for dinner. And Noella points out how she wishes she was greeted by the host, but she grabs a margarita anyways, gets ready, and heads for the dinner right behind the rest of the girls. Now, Noella arrives to the table right after the girls had ordered drinks. They have their QR menu, which, side note, I hate the QR menu at restaurants, especially if they make you order from that and it doesn't work and it just takes forever and blah, blah, blah. I'd rather have a physical menu. But anyways, I get why some people like it. Anyways, Gina is still unsure if she will be able to tame the wild child that is Noella. But Noella then joins in on a cheers to the group for all arriving, and she starts explaining what happened with the passport at the airport, saying she didn't know that she actually had to have her full passport booklet. She thought she just needed the card because she's used to flying private. And she admits in her confessional and at the table, she knows she sounds like a spoiled rich girl by saying she didn't know about this because she's used to flying private, but admits this is her first trip since losing the private plane because her ex filed for divorce. I just want to say I respect her for admitting this and owning up to the fact that it sounds kind of spoiled and rich girly and not normal. And she's saying, I'm trying to figure this out and I got here somehow. So I thought that was good. But it does make me wonder, did she never fly commercial before getting married to James, or didn't know that this was a policy, or has she always flown private, or maybe growing up she didn't fly at all? That could be a possibility. I don't know. It's just an interesting thing, and it kind of supports the idea some people have that she's a little ditzy and not the smartest cookie in the cookie jar, if that makes sense. But we'll get a comment about that in a few seconds. But they then do an orange slice cinnamon shot prompted by Heather after she was recommended that by Terry from his friends at Javier's. And Noella then is wanting her tequila iced before taking a shot. And she says, I'm not going to have warm tequila, where Heather in her confessional is questioning why Noella is being so picky over a shot of alcohol, followed by Heather listing a few other things that she should be more concerned about being picky on than a shot. Then Noella and Shannon are sharing their love for each other in recent weeks, and Noella is trying to say, other people have worse lives than me, so I shouldn't be as sad. And Jen picks up on this in her confessional, saying Noella can't read the room because she is in her own little world. And now before we end this episode, or go back to the last part of the scene, I think the whole thing about the shot and Noella wanting it iced while everyone else is having it warm has a little bit of a deeper meaning, in that I think this is Noella trying to find control and power wherever she can get it in her life right now, because she is in a powerless phase of her life because of the blind side of the divorce. And so I think she's just trying to find whatever she can to feel grounded and in control of her life. Let me know what you think, if that might be a deeper meaning. But Noella is then confronted by the girls on what she has said behind their backs as relayed to them by Nicole. And apparently Noella said Emily only takes her kids to frozen yogurt and shops at Costco. Noella then apologizes for being shady by saying that. But then comments about Gina's boyfriend Travis being a broke loser by Noella comes up, but Noella denies saying that, followed by her saying in her confessional what she did talk about was Gina's house, confessing it was months before she met Gina and it was told to her by Bronwyn. Noella then says she thinks Nicole had marching orders from Heather Dubrow to discredit her in the group, which followed by Gina at the table seeming to be okay to move on from all this gossip or all this shit talking so that they can enjoy the vacation. Emily then points out how Noella didn't eat any of her food, and then Noella makes a big deal about it, saying, oh, why are you food shaming me? And then she's like, fine, I'll eat the potatoes. But this is followed by Noella, Gina, and Emily getting up from the table to kind of walk away and cool off after kind of a heated discussion, where then they tell Noella maybe Heather was offended by you ordering food, then not eating it. Noella is saying, Heather is not going to be happy with anything I do at this point. And then Noella says, what if I don't care what Heather Dubrow thinks? Is that okay for me to say to her face? Kind of in a defeated, like, I can't do anything right tone. Meanwhile, back at the table, Heather is telling Jen and Shannon, this is exactly why I didn't want to invite her. And Shannon then points out how maybe Nicole and Noella clearly aired their dirty laundry to each other, and now they're airing it all out and trying to figure out what to do with all this. So that's where the episode ends, with a to be continued. And this episode didn't really have much to comment on, because it was mostly just setting the scene for the next couple weeks of the cast trip. But I will say, I do feel like we were duped about how Noella was going to arrive on the trip, because it looked like she was going to show up uninvited from the preview, because the preview was shown out of order. And I thought that didn't make sense when I saw it, but I was trying to figure out like what's going on. But I guess because it was a to be continued, they needed to tease us right away before the end of the episode. But we are keeping this one short because the next few weeks look to be chock full of stuff to talk about. But if you have any other live chat or Rumble rant comments, leave them now for me to read before you head out. I'm going to check right now the Rumble rant section because I can't see them on my StreamYard. But give me a second. And as I am looking for this, let's see here. Well, I guess we're just gonna. Actually, I'm gonna, as I'm doing this really quick, make sure to do whatever you have to do to not miss another episode of any of this, whether it's the recaps and the reacts or my news live chats, because I am going to be going live often and in the next one. And then also make sure to do what you got to do to show some love for this episode as well, wherever you are tuning in from. And thank you so much for joining me. And now that we're live on Rumble and YouTube, I now have another thing to adjust as far as Rumble goes, but it looks like it's going well for now. So with that said, thank you so much for tuning in, and I will talk to you in the next one. Bye-bye.